When we read what Day writes on the vocation of St. Thérèse to religious life in the cloister, we can also read between the lines to see Day continuing to work out her own calling as a laywoman in the world. Speaking about vocation to religious life, which Zélie and Louis Martin originally wanted, and to marriage, to which they were ultimately called, Day notes, "Many are not even called to that, but the life of the celibate in the world, a difficult vocation too." Again, for Day, the theme of God's ability to transfigure rejection and apparent failure into fruitfulness and flourishing is central for her understanding of vocation. Day's facility for storytelling and her internalization of the Good Friday, Easter Sunday arc of the Gospels enable her to inscribe that narrative onto the lives of the various members of the Martin family, as well as her own. And this engagement with the Christian imagination invites us to follow suit. Day writes in her preface that she wrote the text in order to help ordinary Catholics to overcome the, quote, sense of futility that plagued so many people in the prosperous but paranoid years of the Cold War. Day wrote to give life to the ideal of personal responsibility and the moral significance of our smallest acts. In the aftermath of the horrors of the First and Second World Wars, God was calling peacemakers. God is still calling peacemakers if we have the courage to respond. The days of the saints have not passed, and the name of Thérèse is written in heaven, which means ours must be as well. Thérèse's call was not without suffering and struggle, but she seems to have been given remarkable clarity about her vocation and did not experience any doubts or misgivings. Day credits this at least in part to the atmosphere of moral and spiritual freedom that prevailed in the Martin family home, in spite of the limited choices available to women of this time and social class. Quote, "In Thérèse's world, she was faced with only 3 choices. She could look forward to marriage, or to living at home as a single woman and caring for her father, or to entering the convent. The atmosphere of the home was one of such liberty that the girls were always free to decide what they wanted, and what they themselves thought was God's will for them. This way in which Thérèse had now set her feet led to Carmel, where Pauline was the only one of her sisters to encourage her when she confided that she wished to enter. As she was only 14 years old at the time, Thérèse's father and uncle were initially unsupportive of the idea of her entering Carmel so quickly, but they came around, evidently realizing her sincerity and perhaps noticing something in the girl that suggested that God had marked her out from an early age. However, the local superior of the Carmelites indicated that he would not permit her entrance until she turned 21. Louis, who by this time was fully behind his youngest daughter's desire to respond to God's call, took her to visit the superior and again ask in person. Although the superior initially rebuffed Louis and Thérèse, he indicated that the bishop would make the final decision. If the bishop permitted Thérèse to enter, the superior could not stand in her way. During this period, when Thérèse began making definitive moves towards Carmel, when she had the full support of her family who trusted her ability to respond to God's will, Thérèse began to experience joy again. In the years between her first communion and her realization of her vocation, Thérèse had endured a protracted period of acute mental illness, but that anguish had now lifted. Day writes, "Over and over again in books on St. Thérèse, it is emphasized that her way is a most ordinary way, a way open to all. She herself said that it was her destiny to show the world of today that holiness is accessible to all, that all are called, and that it is a little way, a simple way for all to follow. And never once does she say that these transports, these joys are not for all. As well as the cross, there are the joys of the spiritual life. Little attention has been paid to these joys in the life of Thérèse. Holiness is accessible to all, and all are called. If Day has one thing to say about vocation, it is this. Elsewhere in her writings, Day frequently returns to the work of the lay apostolate as a subject for reflection and exhortation. Formed in the principles of Catholic action, lay-initiated projects in service to the common good, through her conversations with Peter Morin and her reading of the social encyclicals, Day took a strong interest in promoting projects and organizations that empowered lay men and women to reconstruct a more just social order. In her June 1946 column for The Catholic Worker, Day writes, Houses of hospitality in the city and houses of hospitality on the land. These are great needs. Gathering up people from the highways and byways and compelling them to come in to hear the word. We were told to do it by our Lord himself, and now recent popes cry out for the lay apostolate. When people talk of our work turning into a religious community, I am impatient at this lack of understanding. This work is for the lay people to initiate and to manage. The priests are there to give retreats, to instruct, to preach, to dispense the sacraments. They could use every moment of their time for that and still not have enough. The harvest is great, and the laborers are few. Priests will tend to the spiritual care of the church and will continue their sacramental ministry to the flocks, but the affairs of this world are the responsibility of the laity. For Day, the transformation of the social order, which is at the heart of the Catholic Worker Program, is the work of the lay apostolate. It is a specific and urgent vocation to be at work in a world in such need of holiness.